You didn't know that I was E-Chains outside of here. Y'all didn't know that. And it doesn't look like anybody's buying that. Okay, that's all right. I grew up in the hood. It was a real nice neighborhood, but it was still the hood. We're going to talk a little bit about the E-Connection for just a moment. But before we do that, I want to make sure there's no other comments. Are there any other comments on performance reviews, gathering player profile information? We had some critiques where people were saying, man, why are they asking where my kids go to school? Listen, nobody wants to do anything. We just want this information to, in turn, be able to use this to maybe help or show some appreciation for them. And so that's all we're trying to do with this. So please reiterate that nobody's trying to pry. No one's trying to get too personal of information. We're trying to use this to do what I call the E-Connection. I'm going to talk to you for just a couple of minutes of what the E-Connection is all about. Just these past couple of weeks in sales training, this was actually the subject matter, was the E-Connection. And you have a sheet of paper there. You have a sheet of paper there. And I'm going to ask you to fill out just a couple of things on there. But I wanted to just talk for just a couple of minutes. There's a difference, and if you on your sheet of paper, if you say it says from C to C, there's a difference from communication to connection. And I want you to acknowledge that. So if you just write communication and connection, there's really only a couple of things I want you to jot down. So, and then anything else you feel like jotting down, jot down. Okay? We're not trying to hit you with new information. We're just trying to review some things and ask if you're really focused on this with your people. There's a big difference. I believe communication is a logical thing. I need to get something done, so I talk to these people about it. Or there's a task at hand, I need to get with this person. I need to let this person know. I need to email this person. That's communication. I see that as a logical thing. I see connection going beyond logic. I see it more as an emotional thing. I see it connecting on a deeper level, if you will. That's what I believe is the primary difference between them. The past couple of weeks I've been with salespeople. I talked on 3 subjects. One subject, and I said all 3 of these subjects have the E-Connection in common. All 3 subjects have the E-Connection in common. I just wrote down a couple of things. The first one is that the first subject I talked about was wow factors. I talked about wow factors. When I talked about wow factors, I just talked about how often a salesperson has the opportunity to wow their customer. And I think it happens usually. I believe wow factors tend to happen when there's unbelievable common ground, but it wasn't necessarily planned by the salesperson. So we talked about what do you do to deliberately create a strategy where customers leave saying wow. Because if they leave saying wow, there's no question they're going to tell people about you. They're going to do something we call a proactive referral. That's one subject. The other subject that we covered is something I call finding and offering access. Finding and offering access. We find out you can find out what the customer wants in an automobile. That's one level. To me, that's the logical level. But there's a level that goes beyond what they want. That's finding out why they want what they want. When I find out why they want what they want, I can connect with them on an emotional level because I understand what the car is gaining them access to. Okay? Man, I understand this is not just about a purchase. This is about you having the ability to get back and forth to school, which is setting you up for your future. This is more than an automobile purchase today, sir, and I recognize that. See, I want to be seen in a different light than other salespeople. And so that was the second subject we talked about. And the third subject we talked about, I've talked about this at a couple of the company lunches. I went to hear Jeffrey Gitomer. He has literally the world's best-selling sales book out called The Little Red Book of Selling. And he's got a number of other books. They're all or most of his books are this way. They have this texture, and it's the Little Red Book of Selling, the Little Black Book of Connections, and so forth. Well, I went to his seminar for 3 days, and I just want to reiterate, some of you have heard this story, but some of you have not. And so I just want to share this story with you. Jeffrey Gitomer said this. He said, I have a 3-step sales process. Most of these, when you're talking about commission sales, you got 8 or 10 steps to the sale. He says, I have 3. And he says, my 3 will beat anybody's sales process almost 100% of the time. I've been doing it for decades. And he said, I've literally made millions upon millions of dollars doing these 3 things. Here's what he said. The first thing he does, the first thing he wants to do is he wants to offer value first. He wants to offer value first. He's going to give something to the potential client without any expectation of anything in return. He's offering value first. Okay? Now I want you to start thinking about this subject matter. I'm talking about sales, but I want you to start thinking about this as a leader. Offering of something of value first without any expectation of return. If he's going in for another company to offer his training materials, he'll say, hey, we Googled you guys, we looked everything up about your company, and we analyzed your website, and we came up with a couple of suggestions. Here's what our IT guy did, and it's helped a number of other companies generate a lot more traffic. If you want us to do it, it's something we're just going to do for you just for considering us. Boom. He just offered something for free. Everybody else is looking for coming in and ready to give their pitch. I offer value first. Okay, not a value presentation. He gives something to them of value. That's first. The second thing he says he does is he makes a personal connection. I make a personal connection. We call that building rapport. Okay? He makes a personal connection. He says, I've gotten really good at this over the years, at just understanding the person, figuring out what they're all about, and making that person, finding that common ground and making that connection. That's the second thing he does. And then he says, then I use, once I have that established, my number 3 step is I do something memorable. I do something memorable. That's it. He says those 3 steps will be any sales process 100% of the time. He gave a couple of examples of it in our session, but then he used the guy in the front row. I was in the back row of this session, and he looked at the guy in the front row and he says, Paul, can I share a little bit about our conversation a couple of days ago? Paul says, sure. He says, Paul and I are both interested in sports. Jeffrey Gittimer collects a lot of sports memorabilia. Man, that word always, that's a tough one. Well, they start talking about baseball, and the guy says that his grandfather played for 1 year in the major leagues. 1 year. And he says, he starts talking about everything he knows about his grandfather and the stories he used to tell, and they just had a really strong connection. Okay? Jeffrey Gittimer says, we had a really good conversation, didn't we? He says, can I share your letter? He says, sure. He pulls up on the PowerPoint 3-paragraph letter that the guy in the front row wrote to Jeffrey Gittimer saying, man, just the conversation we had, I felt a special connection to you. And at the very end of it, he said, you listened to me talk about my grandfather. And it meant the world to me, even if for just a few moments I could think back on it. He says, I really appreciate the time. Here's 30-something, about 25 people in the class just reading this. We're like, man, that's a really nice letter. He says, you see what I mean? We made a connection. I'm really good at connecting with people. He said, but then, he says, my last step is to do something memorable. And Paul, you said you don't have a lot of things left from your grandfather and his time in the major leagues. He said, but I got this delivered. It's Sunday morning. He says, this came about an hour and a half ago. And he says, I have a baseball card, and it's your grandfather. And I have it autographed, and it's yours. And he just gives it to him. What do you think the guy in the front row did? He broke down. He literally started bawling. Half the room was in tears. And he said, folks, I have been doing this for years and years and years, finding a way to connect and to be memorable. I say all 3 of those subjects to say this. What are we doing to connect with our people? What are we doing to establish that? Here's what I believe. I believe we are doing more to connect with our people than we ever have. I hear stories almost every week. I come into sales training and say, hey, what good things are going on? And people are sharing stories about the people in this room and the things you're doing to connect with people. People are sending emails to Stephen. So I believe we're doing more of this than ever, and I'm thinking this is the time to channel in, to dial in and really focus on our people. So I'm saying we're not talking about something new. We're talking about how do we use our player profile information? How do we use the stuff that we know about our people to connect with them on a deeper level? So when I say the E connection, what does the E stand for? Emotional. How do we make that stronger, that deeper connection, that emotional connection? So if you want to make a note of that, make a note of that on your sheet of paper. I got just a couple of last minute things to say. I said, power. Here's what I want. Power, this is the best definition I know of power. Power is the measure of difference. The measure of difference. How much more powerful are you than the next leader at the dealership across the street? How much more powerful are you? That is the measure of difference. How much more different are you in a positive way? And here's what that means. In the world of automobiles, you got 2 cars that are roughly the same size. You can take horsepower. And you can say, hey, one car's got 138 horsepower. Its competition has 120. The difference is 18 horsepower. But in our world, when we're talking people and relationships, it comes down to the two I's. The two I's, I call them influence and impact. Power in our world is influence. How much influence do you have on people? Is your word enough? Do people respond to what you say? Have you connected with them on an emotional level? And that's what we're talking about today. And so all I want you to do today is not hit you with new stuff, but get you to think about that. If I will influence people, I have the opportunity to impact their lives. That's part of what we're here to do. And I believe when we do that, and the more we're doing that, listen to this, we're at an all-time high as an organization for production. We've never been at this level. And you say, what one thing can you point to? There's a lot of things. We've got campaigns going. We've got the right people in the right position. But we've got more people connecting on more of a personal level, more coaching going on than I've seen. We're doing a lot more than just lip service. We're putting this stuff in place, and you even heard some testimonies of it today of managers and how well it's going in their store when you show you genuinely care. The last thing I want to tell you about is, and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, Jerry and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about an employee whose numbers had dipped. And he said, man, I'm trying everything. I've had a couple one-on-ones with him, two-on-ones with him to work with him. His numbers dipped over 3 months. And he said, I'm welcoming another face in to talk to him. I said, well, hey, he'll be in a training session in a couple of days. I'll talk to him as well. I talked to this guy after the session and pulled him aside and said, hey, I just want to talk to you for a couple of minutes in private if I can. Said, hey, I've noticed your numbers have dipped. And his immediate response, instead of being defensive, was, man, he says, that's what I like about this place. He says, my numbers have dipped for the 3rd month. And he says, and I've had 3 managers already talking to me about it out of genuine concern. He says, what's your question? I said, well, I just want to find out what's going on, and if you know some things, and if you've been analyzing, and you figured out what's going on and why your numbers are dipping. We had a conversation, and I knew Jerry would be thorough on the whole sales process, and I'm thinking, man, what else could we talk about? So I don't know this guy outside of work. So I start talking about him outside of work, and I find out some things. I found out he lost his dad in November. I found out he stepped out of the car business because his dad was ill for a number of months. I found out also that this guy at one time, not too long ago, weighed about 50 pounds more. And so we started talking about this. And the next thing you know, he says, I said, well, man, if you lost 50 pounds, I said, how's your workout going? He says, it's not. When I started at Taylor, that's when it all, right when I started, that's when I kind of stepped back because I knew I was picking up hours and whatever. I said, well, could that have could that have an impact on you? Didn't you feel you had more energy? He says, man, he says, you're onto something. My wife and I started talking about this, and now my son is interested in doing this. He says, Dad, I want to do some of the stuff you're doing to work out. And she says, so I have an opportunity this summer to do this. I told him, I'm going to be following up with you on this, not to pester you, but because I care. I sent this guy a text yesterday, and I just want to read his response, and then we're going to move you into some groups and do another activity. His response is this: hey, thanks for your concern, exclamation point. It is definitely appreciated. I am on day 3, actually, of my 90-day program and when I lost 50 pounds. I have lost 3.5 pounds since we spoke. Just wanted to say thanks for sitting down. I firmly believe that exercising was the issue. I have a few things working. Plan on having a strong finish. My son's been watching his sugar intake, had me give him a fresh haircut, and wants to ask a girl out, so he's wanting to do a similar plan once his school is out. Thanks again for your concern, and have a great rest of the day. I believe this is being reiterated across the company more so than we ever have in our history, and my thing is, how do we leverage it that much more?